minutes from now.
So, good day, Dr. Leela, and also to my fellow classmates. So, this is our first assessment presentation for research methodology. I am Tan Shou Yi, you can call me Jessie, and my partner, Adam GEORDREY. All right, so the following is basically the content we'll cover. So, we'll talk about our area of interest and our selected articles, then Article 1, Article 2, and Adam will help us conclude this, sharing the similarities and differences in the articles. Right. So, area of interest and topic. Adam and I were both teachers, so we note that our students struggle to comprehend texts, especially texts that are of culture that they're not familiar with. So, what our research studies on is basically the effect of cultural familiarity on reading comprehension. Mine has an extension of studying the appreciation of text as well, while his focuses on the process of reading. All right, so these are our selected articles. So mine is by Pat News and Palanu Ko Wong, and his is from Bensala and Garage. Both are quite recent articles. Right, so moving on to Article 1. So the effect of cultural familiarity on reading comprehension and attitudes towards reading English short stories written by native speaker and a Thai author. Okay. Right, so this is my tabulated summary. So basically the focus and topic of the article is to, again, like its title, look at the effect of whether or not being familiar with a culture plays a role in affecting reading comprehension, and as well as identifying or investigating readers' attitude towards the short story. So the two research questions are, one, to compare students' reading comprehension of English short stories, one that is written by native speaker and another that is written by a local author. So the local author that we're talking about here is basically a Thai author. Okay, and to investigate the attitudes towards reading. So do they prefer reading something that they're familiar with or something that they're not familiar with? So the model or the theory that this research is based on is the schema theory. So we have the formal schema and the content schema. For everyone's information, formal schema is basically your knowledge of language, the word, and as well as syntax, all those technical stuff. While content schema is then your culture, which includes cultural schemata, is more of personal experience, their background knowledge of whether or not they can associate with the content in the text. So this is a quasi-experimental study. So I think one of the group mentioned as well what quasi is, but in this case, this research in particular, what was quasi about it is that a factor was manipulated. Okay, so in this sense, the target group is given a story that is written by a native speaker and a story that is written by a local author, and then they compare the effect that it has on the reader. So that's quasi-experimental. So the results are collected through, so for research question number 1, for reading comprehension, is obviously a test and it's open-ended question. And then for the attitude, it's a questionnaire, also open-ended. So in terms of data analysis, one is descriptive statistic divided into 3 portions. So they analyze the literal comprehension, then inferential comprehension, as well as the overall comprehension result. So in terms of the questionnaire for attitude, it is qualitative analysis. Right. So moving on, we are targeting the 35 third-year English major students of Prince Songkla University who are familiar with reading literary text extensively. Okay, worth mentioning is that they also mentioned that 29 of them have no experience living in English native-speaking countries, while 6 had an average of 1 month experience in such countries. Okay, this we'll talk about this later on as part of the gap or limitation. Findings of this research, question 1, to answer reading comprehension ability, obviously the results showed a very significant percentage to say that Thai short story has higher performance, so both literal and inferential. In terms of question number 2, what the researchers did is that they analyzed the result and they categorized it into 3 categories: authenticity, ease of understanding, as well as interest. So authenticity has something to do with how real the story is to them. So 2 out of 17. The number is 17, being only 17 answered the questionnaire. So again, we'll talk about that later as part of the limitation and gap. So 2 reported that Thai story is more authentic to them. And then 7 out of 17 reported that it is easier to understand a Thai story because they could read more smoothly and they could maintain their attention. 1 out of 7 reported she could guess unknown words, and then 5 out of 17 reported American story took longer. And then 2 out of 5 from that group said that American story is confusing and it demotivates them because it's difficult to understand the cultural aspect. Okay, and but we do have positive review where 2 out of 5 said that even though it's difficult, it is worthwhile. And that tied into our last category, that is interest. So 1 out of 17 reported that they are interested in reading Thai story because there is a connection, while another report that Thai story is more engaging for them. So with that, we have our limitation and gaps. So for question 1, the researchers did mention when they explained their findings that you can see significant results of prediction, the students being able to predict story, what will happen next in Thai story, can guess vocabulary through contextual clue, could imagine the imagery, could recall information. But what is lacking is that in the report, it wasn't very clearly shown. It wasn't broken down to specific reading skills. So that is worth exploring. Question 2, in terms of attitude, as mentioned, only 17 out of 35 participants answered the questionnaire. We don't quite know why they didn't answer the rest of them. But yes, the insignificant number highlighted for findings and conclusion is the problem. Other limitations of this research is highlighted also by the researcher is only 1 short story and stories of similar themes. And then also the sample group, not mentioned there in the findings, it's an influence of experience living abroad. So that is all from me, passing it on to Adam.
All right, so can you hear my voice, Doctor? Okay, so for the article, the second one that I selected, which is aligned with the first one, title is The Effect of Cultural Schemata on EFL Learners' Reading Comprehension Ability by Bensala and George 2020. Right, so let's look at the tabulated summary. Okay, so here the topic focus on the question of this paper is very clear, where the topic, as I read earlier, is the effect of cultural schemata on AFL learners' reading comprehension ability. So here the keywords that you can look at is the cultural schemata on the reading comprehension ability, which is aligned with the first article, where in this paper it is focusing on to investigate the impact of cultural schemata on the process of reading culturally loaded text and whether the use of the pre-reading activities recompenses for the absence of cultural familiarity. So the question here, this is actually a general one that is also listed in the paper. How do cultural differences in background knowledge influence students' reading comprehension ability? But there are actually 4 specific research questions that the researcher has actually listed in the paper. The first one, does the cultural familiarity affect the process of reading comprehension? So does it affect? The second one, is the lacking of cultural background knowledge affect the reading comprehension ability? So the first one is cultural familiarity. The second one, lack of cultural background. Third one, activation of background knowledge. And the fourth question is pre-reading activities influence, which all 4 questions are looking at the effect on the reading comprehension ability. So the concept and theoretical model that is applied in the paper, schema theory, cultural schemata, same with the first paper, but here it is actually highlighted that it was firstly introduced by Ken, 1781, and later on by Bartlett in 1932. So if you look at the method or the paradigm of this paper, it is a quasi-classroom experiment because, as mentioned by the previous group as well, there are 2 groups that is involved in this paper, the control group and the experimental group. So for the data, this is actually a qualitative paper where the statistics are descriptive and added with participant observation. I have something to say on this participant observation later on, but let's move on first before we move to the difference and similarities between the two papers. Okay, for the context, so this research was conducted in Ibn Khaldun University, Tehran, where there were 40 participants selected. They were divided into experimental and control group of classic classroom experiment of first year EFL students, age vary between 18 and 22 years old, where most of them are females. So here, the findings, I put it into two, general and specific, because in this paper, I realized the researcher actually, most of the time, including the statements which are not proven by any statistics or data. So these are the two that I highlighted and include in this presentation on the general findings. So for the experimental group, respondents expressed their opinions differently as well as vividly, while for the control group, the participants showed little involvement with a sign of being too passive. Now, if you remember, earlier I actually mentioned about participant observation. So this is the data that were actually obtained through the observation. The only curiosity that I have on the paper is how was the observation was made. It was not stated, and when it comes to observation, we need to know what was actually observed, what is actually taken into account. So this is actually the part where I put as limitations in the paper. But for the data proven, the descriptive statistics, we can see that the mean score for correct answers for the experimental group is 18.20 for the correct answer and 1.80 for the incorrect answer. Thus, it was again concluded by the researcher with no proven statement by saying activating learners' cultural schemata via pre-reading activity instruction was successful. So this is actually to answer the four research questions, but again, I believe it will be more reliable if it is actually proven. So for the control group, the mean score for correct answer is only 17.30, which is obviously lower, and 2.70 for the incorrect answer, which is obviously higher. So from the reading of these two numbers, the researcher concluded that the background knowledge of the reading text is not activated. Okay, let's look at the limitations and gaps that I actually detected from the paper. There are three. The first one, students in Algerian universities encounter deficiencies and reading obstacle in language skills. This was the statement that I took exactly from the paper, but what I found a little bit on the contrary is there are missing data. It is a non-proven statement because to me, if this is a statement which the researcher used to group the respondents into experimental and non-experimental, there has to be a test to prove that they actually belong to this group, or maybe a questionnaire or a survey. But it was not stated there. I mean, how do these researchers actually obtain this data on the researcher's background, on the respondent's background, sorry. Second one, inability to make inference, analyzing concept has resulted in an adequate performance in their reading skill. Thus, providing pre-reading text would help. Again, stated as one assumed reason. But because the research question actually pointed out this part, so it's actually generally touched on and proven by the data. And the last one, this is the limitation that I found should not happen, where the researcher only used one theme or topic that was selected for the reading text, which is the topic on tattoo. Because tattoo, it could be something that they have been familiarized with or they have not been familiarized with. So there is an argument that we could say whether the pre-reading is actually familiarizing them with it, or they actually don't need the reading. They actually know it before even the pre-reading activity. Right. Let's move on to the next one. We are going to look at the conclusion and later on highlights on similarities and the limitations and gaps within both papers. So the conclusion that we both concluded is, despite of using different text types for each study, both papers aim to look at the impact of sociocultural context on learners' reading comprehension ability. And although the data for both research was obtained differently, where the first article is an open-ended attitude questionnaire, and for the second article is a knowledge-based test, which is related to the text used in the pre, while, and post test. Both studies actually concluded in a similar way, in which the relation between sociocultural background, that is a theory itself, the schema, and reading comprehension ability was highlighted as a proven theory. This is actually for both papers. Right, now let's look at the similarity and the differences in specific for both paper. The similarities that we found is that both paper actually support the significance of culture schemata on reading comprehension, and it discussed the impact of culture schemata on lexical inferencing, but lacking details. Okay, for the difference and gaps in the first and the second article, so for the first article, pedagogical implications, embedding local English frictions at introductory stage, while the second article is actually looking at the pedagogical implication, where it focuses on the activation of culture schemata. So the next one, if we look very closely, the first article explores on the attitude, while the second article explores on the process of reading. So this is the difference between the two papers, although they both actually came with the same, almost identical conclusion, that is to prove the theory of schemata have an impact on reading comprehension ability. So with that, I say thank you for listening and your attention. Thank you.
Just one question.